Every day, you make decisions: what to buy, who to trust, what to believe. But here's the real question: are those decisions really yours, or are they designed? This channel breaks down the psychology behind everything. I'm Shrest, and this is where we decode the world.
All right, let's dive right into this explainer with a detail that genuinely unsettled me when I first read the research. Right now, today, in Paris, there is a box sitting in a high-security government vault, and it's not holding gold or state secrets. It's holding handwritten notebooks from 1898. Now, you might think you could just walk in and ask to see them, but it is absolutely not that simple. Because the incredible woman who wrote these notebooks spent years handling radioactive materials barehanded, scientists estimate these objects, along with her clothes, her furniture, the whole shebang, won't be safe to handle without protection until the year 3500 AD. That's another 1500 years from now. This just brilliantly illustrates how deep Marie Curie was in her research. I mean, to even look at her notes today, you need written permission from the French National Library. You have to sign a liability waiver, and you have to wear full-on protective hazmat gear. Her personal belongings, literally down to her cookbook, are essentially nuclear waste. And the crazy thing? She had no idea. She used to carry radioactive test tubes in her dress pockets just because she thought the glowing lights looked pretty, and she even kept radium right in her desk drawers. Section 1, Forged in Erasure, the Occupied Childhood. To really understand this unstoppable drive of hers, we have to rewind to 1867 Warsaw. Now, this was a time when Poland didn't technically exist on the map. Marie, who was born Maria Skłodowska, grew up in a brutally occupied country that was actively being erased by the Russian Tsarist regime. Her father, a teacher, was fired simply because the Russians didn't trust him. As the money ran out, the family was forced into smaller and smaller apartments. By the time she was just 10 years old, she had already lost her eldest sister to typhus and her mother to tuberculosis. Just unimaginable hardship. And the Tsarist mission wasn't just political, it was cultural erasure. They outright banned the Polish language. They monitored and fired native teachers. Oh, and women? Completely banned from attending university. So what did Marie do? She defied them. She joined something called the Flying University. Now, this wasn't some prestigious ivy-covered campus. It was a secret, illegal, underground school. Classes were held in private apartments that constantly rotated to dodge the authorities. Her massive scientific ambition and her drive to prove the brilliance of the Polish people against Russian oppression was quite literally forged in these hidden rooms under the constant, terrifying threat of arrest. That early defiance translated into some unbelievable personal sacrifice. To fund her older sister Branya's medical degree in Paris, Marie worked as a countryside governess for 6 long years, sending away every single ruble she earned and reading science books entirely alone at night. Finally, in 1891, at age 24, it was her turn. She took a train to Paris, basically broke and completely alone, to enroll at the prestigious Sorbonne. She lived in a tiny, freezing rented room. There are actual accounts of her fainting from hunger during lectures. But you know what? She still finished first in her class. Section 2, 7 Tons of Rock, the Shed That Changed Physics. So, in 1894, her life takes a monumental turn. She meets a brilliant, quiet physicist named Marie Curie. They get married, taking their science notebooks on a bicycle honeymoon, which is just amazing, and she decides to investigate these bizarre, invisible rays coming from uranium for her PhD. Well, by measuring these mysterious rays, she discovered something that shattered the scientific consensus of the entire era. She literally coined the term radioactivity. At the time, scientists firmly believed atoms were inert, indivisible, basically just dead rocks, the smallest level. But Marie proved that the intensity of radiation depended only on the amount of uranium, meaning something incredibly dynamic was actually happening inside the atom itself. But then she noticed something even stranger. A mineral called pitchblende was giving off far more radiation than pure uranium could account for. That meant an unknown, highly radioactive element was hiding inside it. And to find it, it took a staggering 7 tons of raw rock. I really want to emphasize the immense physical toll this took. Over 4 brutal years, Maria and Pierre manually processed those 7 tons of pitchblende ore, plus 400 tons of water and 40 tons of corrosive chemicals. They did this in a leaking, unventilated wooden shed. Marie did the bulk of the heavy lifting, hand-stirring boiling radioactive ore with a massive iron rod that was literally taller than she was. Her hands were constantly burned and cracked. And all of that backbreaking work yielded just 1/10 of 1 gram of radium. And tragically, they had no idea the radiation was hurting them. They used to just sit in that dark shed at night, watching their new elements faintly glow like fairy lights. By the summer of 1898, they isolated a new element that was 400 times more radioactive than uranium. And this brings us right back to her roots. She named it polonium. She deliberately named a groundbreaking radioactive element after Poland, a country the world had literally erased from the map. It was a brilliant, defiant move to draw international attention to the fact that Polish identity was still very much alive. Section 3. Tragedy and 2 Nobels, an unmatched record. In 1903, the Curies and Henry Becquerel were awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics, making Marie the first woman in history to win one. The French press went wild. But then, absolute tragedy struck. In April 1906, Pierre stepped out onto a rainy Paris street, was hit by a horse-drawn carriage, and died instantly. Completely shattered by the loss of her partner, Marie refused to stop. She took over his professorship, becoming the first female professor in the history of the Sorbonne. Legend has it, when she walked into that packed lecture hall for the first time, the room went dead silent, and she started her lecture from the exact sentence where Pierre had left off. She just kept pushing. And in 1911, despite surviving a vicious, highly publicized scandal in the French press, she won her second Nobel Prize, this time in chemistry, for isolating pure radium. And that brings her total to 2. Over a century later, Marie Curie is still the only person in history, man or woman, to win Nobel Prizes in 2 completely different scientific fields. It's an absolutely unmatched record. Section 4. The Little Curies. The WI humanitarian mission. Fast forward to 1914, World War I breaks out. Soldiers are dying across Europe from infected wounds, and surgeons are operating completely blind. They're amputating limbs that could have been saved because battlefield X-rays simply didn't exist. The technology was massive and bolted to hospital floors. So, Marie Curie rapidly mobilized. She hustled wealthy friends for donations, convinced local auto mechanics to outfit cars with X-ray equipment for free, crammed anatomy textbooks, and actually learned how to drive in her mid-40s. Then, she deployed directly to the brutal front lines alongside her 17-year-old daughter, Irene. This operation was relentless. She built 20 of these mobile X-ray vehicles. Troops called them Petite Curies, or Little Curies. She set up 200 fixed X-ray stations at military hospitals and trained 150 women to operate the machinery right in the field. She even personally carried France's only radium supply to safety in a heavy lead box on a train, and literally tried to melt down her solid gold Nobel medals to fund the French war effort. She placed herself and her team in incredibly dangerous conditions, fully aware of the health risks of X-rays, because the alternative was letting soldiers die on operating tables from shrapnel nobody could locate. Through her sheer force of will, her mobile and fixed stations treated an estimated 1 million soldiers during the First World War. 1 million lives touched by her direct action. Section 5. The Radioactive Legacy. Uncovering the true cause. By the late 1920s, her health was failing completely. Her eyesight was almost gone from cataracts, her hands were covered in radiation burns that wouldn't heal, and her blood counts were plummeting. She was exhausted all the time. Which brings up a really fascinating question. What actually killed Marie Curie? For decades, everybody naturally assumed it was her radium discoveries in that leaky shed. But she always pushed back on that. She argued she was super careful about not physically ingesting the radium. She firmly believed something else was to blame. Astonishingly, tests on her remains in 1995, 61 years after she died of aplastic anemia at age 66, proved her exactly right. Scientists found almost no radium in her body. The true culprit that destroyed her bone marrow, massive X-ray exposure during World War I. So the heartbreaking reality is that she was killed by her humanitarian mission to save 1 million soldiers, not by her scientific discovery. Today, she rests in the Pantheon in Paris, in a coffin lined with nearly 1 inch of lead, the first woman interred there based purely on her own monumental achievements. Just look at the legacy she left behind. She invented the whole concept of radioactivity, essentially launching the atomic age. She discovered 2 periodic elements by hand. She pioneered radium therapy, which is the direct ancestor of the cancer radiotherapy used in hospitals today. Oh, and remember that 17-year-old daughter who drove ambulances at the front? Irene grew up to win her own Nobel Prize in chemistry in 1935. Talk about an unmatched family legacy. Marie Curie was a woman forced to forge her genius in secret underground rooms just to defy the erasure of her Polish homeland. And she ended up buried in a lead coffin, so radioactive we literally can't touch her notebooks today. Pushing humanity into the atomic age and saving 1 million lives cost her absolutely everything. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this. Knowing the immense, fatal toll it would take, is the cost of saving 1 million lives and changing science forever a sacrifice you would have made? Let that sink in. See you next time.
Think about power, identity, and how situations shape who we are. Subscribe.